Hey everybody, I'm Tyler Mansmith, and today we're going to be going over the family history, the family legacy of the Mansmiths. So I'm here with my great Uncle Denny, who is an expert on our family history, and he's going to go over a little bit about what we're going to go over in terms of the family research, and he's going to give us a little bit of a history lesson.
Thank you, Tyler. I'm not quite sure that I fit the bill of expert, but I will certainly do my utmost to help the cause of telling a story about the Mansmiths and their struggles from Germany into the colonies in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, in Iowa, and in Illinois. We've got history that lends itself to all of those geographic areas. And my hope is that somebody in our family will find it interesting enough to kind of pick up the ball at some point in their life and carry on the research and the continuing legacy of the Mansmith family. I hope you enjoy what we are putting together, and I essentially and appreciatively want to thank Tyler again for all of his expertise in making all of this happen. But in general, we're going to talk about Mansmiths from 1680 up to and including current day. So I hope you enjoy the video, and if you've got any questions or comments, please let me know, and I'll do my utmost to try and respond to you. So thank you again for listening.
How did you become more interested in your ancestry research?
Well, Tyler, I think the best thing to do would be to start off at the beginning, or my first understanding of what ancestry and ancestry research and family trees mean, at least mean to me. It goes back to probably around 1970, maybe a couple of years prior to that, my family on my dad's side, my dad, his brother and sisters got together periodically every couple of years to do a family type reunion. It was held in Dubuque, Iowa, and it was just really mostly a social gathering, a get-together of my dad's brother and sisters, their offspring, my cousins. I think in total there was about 18. Not all of them ever showed up for the family reunion in Dubuque, but nonetheless, they were certainly invited. And it was a good weekend. We had a lot of fun, but somewhere along the line, one of my aunts decided to put together in writing a family tree as best as she could, define dates and times and places for some of the family tree members to record it, so that as time went on, we would have some sort of document that we could in turn use to either further the research of the family tree or to bring it forward closer to me and my kids and my grandkids, so on and so forth. So it started off, this was long before we had computers, personal computers. It was a typewriter and a sheet of paper. And from there, it developed into other things as time went on. But I did want to show what the family tree looked like back in the 1970 time period. Nonetheless, this is how it looked. You can see that the paper is worn and is yellowed, and attached to it are updates for the various families, things that have changed, people that were born or added, corrections that were made. Sometimes the corrections were simply a strike through and a pencil notation. But this is what the family tree looked like back then. And there was several pages of this type of information. Usually there was a section for each family. So this went through a number of iterations in the subsequent family get-togethers. And each time we got together, it got better and better until the data was pretty accurate. Then, as families do, dads and uncles and aunts started dying off. And all of a sudden, the family get-together, the reunions in Dubuque, Iowa, stopped. And it stopped for 25 years, maybe. During that period of time, as far as I know, not much happened with keeping up the family tree. Somewhere around 1995, I began thinking about it. So as I got older, the desire to learn more about my family and my heritage became more and more prevalent. And in discussion with a couple of my cousins on my dad's side, it was determined that we needed to think about having another family reunion. We didn't know if there was much interest, but we thought we would at least attempt to contact what is now the cousins, the next generation of the 1970s family reunion, to see if there was interest in getting together to reminisce about family and to hopefully enhance the document that previously existed with the former ancestors. So we wound up going about checking with family to see if there was an interest. And surprisingly enough, there was a lot of interest. I mean, I was dumbfounded as to how much interest there was in the family, the cousins, and the offspring of cousins to try to get together, just, if nothing else, to reminisce about old times. We had the family reunion, as I recall, in 1999. And in the meantime, I had taken this old document from the 70s and updated it to an Excel spreadsheet that kind of looks like this. Each family had their own spreadsheet. It was 9 or 10 or 11 pages long, and there were a lot of holes in it, but the intent was to start something like this as a takeoff from the original document. We had this reunion, and I had asked specifically for feedback from everybody. And somewhere in here, I've got a photograph. I don't know whether you can see it on the camera or not, but it's a photograph of everybody that was at this family reunion in 1999. And it was a fun weekend. We enjoyed it. Um, my hope was that we would get a lot of feedback so I could enhance this Excel spreadsheet, but didn't get a lot of input from other people. So after the reunion, things kind of died down, and I had done about as much as I could with the Excel spreadsheet. So I, to be perfectly honest, kind of lost interest in the family tree for some period of time. I wasn't sure what that all meant at the time, but I had set it aside. So somewhere around, I will say 2015, I started thinking about the family tree again. And a couple of years ago, one of my kids, stepkids, bought me a subscription to Ancestry.com. And it was just unbelievable how much information was on the computer relating to our collective ancestors. And so I started in earnest to recreate some ancestry family trees that went back in time as far as I could go, at least here in the US. But currently there are 1,957 names in that family tree. Now, you might say, well, how do you keep track of all that? The answer is I don't. Some of those people, I have no idea of who they are other than they're in a record in Ancestry.com. My original intent was to take the Mansmith bloodline and take that back as far as I could go. Unfortunately, it meant that a lot of people were not included in that, including all of the women in our lives. And in reality, the women are every bit as important as the men who carried the surname that I was tracing back. But I had to make decisions in order to keep the family tree manageable. And if somebody needs or wants to take one of the women in our past, take their tree back as far as they want to, they can certainly do that. And then somewhere along the way, I took that back about as far as I could go. I started branching out and taking a look at some of the grandparents and great-grandparents or grandmas in our lives and where they came from.
What prompted you to go into your ancestry research in more detail?
Well, somewhere along the way, and maybe it has something to do with age, you start to realize your mortality, that you're not going to be on this earth forever. When you're 20, 30, or 40 years old, the thought of dying or passing is the furthest thing from your mind. You don't even think about that. But the older you get, the more that becomes a reality. And I think at some point I realized that I needed to find out more about where I came from. Where I came from, to some degree, defines who I am today. And so to learn more about ancestry and my family, why they did what they did, where they moved and why did they move there, what type of occupations they may have had, what kind of difficulties that they may have had. So there were a lot of things that I think had a factor in determining me getting back into this family tree thing.
So where do we begin with all this ancestry research?
If I had to pick a time period to start, it would, for the most part, be the beginning of the Mansmith name. We weren't always Mansmiths. If you go back to 1680, which is when the first recollection of a Mansmith in this country. His name wasn't Mansmith at the time. It was a man by the name of Schmidt, German in nature. And from that particular time period up until about my sixth generation, we were known as Schmidts. And fortunately or unfortunately, there are a dozen or more different variations of the name Schmidt.
Why are there so many variations on the name Mansmith?
I think some of it goes back to simple laziness, to be perfectly honest. When you say Schmidt, you can be very definitive in the pronunciation of the word Schmidt. But if you're using it in everyday language, sometimes the syllables, sometimes the vowels get mushed together and it comes out Schmidt. Or they forget a syllable in there that is very important. And likewise, the people that are recording those names, whether it's a county clerk because you've been given a land grant or because you're in front of a justice of the peace getting married or because you're in a church and you're getting baptized, oftentimes those recorders did not take the time to ask a person to spell their name. They spelled it phonetically. So if you mispronounced it, that permanent document was going to most likely be incorrect as far as spelling is concerned. And I've run across a number of different spellings for the same person depending upon who recorded the name. So most of that, I think, is stemming from mispronunciation and then misrecording of the name Schmidt. Keep in mind, Schmidt is not an easy name to say, and it's even harder to spell. And so some of these iterations of that original name are not uncommon for a lot of different names. There's a lot of people that came to this country that had an original name that may have been somewhat difficult to pronounce, and subsequently they shortened it. In our case, Schmidt became Mansmith. Mansmith is easy to say, pretty easy to spell. I mean, there's not a lot of complications to that name. So I think it evolved to what we have today. The name Schmidt is probably still in existence in the western part of Germany. The Rhine River Valley in particular. I have a location where the first American generation of Schmidts came from. I can't pronounce it, I can't spell it, but I can write it because I've recorded it. But suffice it to say, it was in the Rhine River Valley of Western Germany. And when they made the migration over to what was then the colonies, because we weren't a country at that time, they were identified as Palatines for some reason, because I think in Germany there was a general location called Palatine region, part of the Rhine River Valley. So part of our heritage is we came from the German Palatines.
How far back in time do the Mansmiths go?
The first recorded name that I have was a man by the name of Christian Mansmith, born in 1680 in Germany. He migrated to the colonies in about 1734.
Why do you think they left Germany?
Well, I don't know that there's any specific reason that's recorded as to why the Mansmiths moved from Germany through England to the colonies, but there are a number of situations that existed in Germany about the time that Christian Mansmith decided that he needed to move. For one thing, there was a famine in Germany during that period of time. I think it lasted 7, 8, 9, maybe 10 years. So there was a shortage of food. That was a big deal. There was the situation where the church was essentially persecuting people in Germany who were not the quote-unquote state church affiliate. In Germany, even though if you go back to 15, 17, I think, when Martin Luther nailed the 95 theses on the wall, on the door of a church, I thought that the Reformation had begun, and in fact, that there was a change. Well, the reality is there was a change for a while, there was an uprising for a while, but the state church, primarily Catholicism, was prevalent in Germany and remained so long after the quote-unquote Reformation. So if you were a non-Catholic, as our ancestors were, they were either Lutheran or Reformed church, they were persecuted for it. So that's a second reason. A third reason is the fact that our ancestors were primarily farmers, and farmers in Germany, for the most part, had to farm land that was owned by somebody else, a duke, a baron of German royalty. And so a portion of what they grew and were able to sell is, or was, a product of the duke or the owner of the property, who got a share of that earnings that the farmer earned. So it was very difficult for a farmer, a general farmer, to own land in Germany. You had to be almost royalty in order to allow that to occur. So the thought of moving to the colonies was intriguing from the standpoint that if they came to the colonies, land grants were provided very freely to farmers. All they had to do was clear the land and grow their crops and sell them back to England. So that the fact that they could own land was a big deal. The colonies were brought up with the understanding that religion was free. You could believe whatever you so chose, and as such, if they wanted to be Lutheran, if they wanted to be Reformed, if they wanted to be Catholic, they had the right to do so and not be persecuted for it. So that, coupled with the fact that there wasn't a famine in the colonies, led a lot of Germans to migrate from Germany through England to the New World.
So, where exactly did they settle when they got here?
Well, German countrymen settled in a number of places, anywhere from the Carolinas to New York, up to the Northeast. And a lot of Germans from the Rhine River Valley initially settled in New York for a period of time, but the governor of New York was only providing a 10-acre plot of ground that was being offered to immigrants coming in. And 10 acres is not nearly enough for a farmer to farm and to support his family. However, if they crossed the Susquehanna and went into Pennsylvania, William Penn, who was a governor at one point in time, and John Logan was another governor of the Pennsylvania Territory, they were offering a quarter section of land. And a quarter section is 640 acres, which is a square mile, divided by 4, or 160 acres. By standards of that time, 160 acres was a very, very nice farm. And it could support a large family. So the thought of moving to Pennsylvania was something that many Germans picked up on and migrated to. Our ancestors settled in a county called Berks County. At one time it was still part of Pennsylvania or Philadelphia County, but they settled in an area that in today's world is Berks County. And it was there that they farmed land, that they were offered land grants, several of them as a matter of fact, and prospered quite well for a period of time. Christian Mansmith settled in Berks County in about 1734. The exact date is still somewhat undefined, but based on the records that I have been able to dig up, it was about 1734. The land in Berks County was plentiful. It was very, very good farming land. There was already a settlement of Germans in Berks County, so they had relationships with their countrymen. Everybody spoke German. And there was religious freedom, as I mentioned a moment ago. About 3 years later, Christian's son, who by the name, he was Johannes Conrad. He's what I call our 8th generation ancestor. And maybe I should make mention that in going back generations, rather than saying someone was my great, 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 great grandfather, I might say that he was my 6th generation ancestor. And what I mean by that is that I consider myself the 1st generation. My dad is the 2nd generation. My grandfather is the 3rd generation, so on and so forth. Christian Mansmith, who came over from Germany, is my 9th generation ancestor. So Conrad, his son, is my 8th generation ancestor. And that's how far back I've been able to go due to the fact that I wanted to contain my research to Mansmiths in the what is now the U.S. or the colonies at the time. So Conrad received grants not only for himself, but also was able to pick up grants from his father for land. And so in a very short period of time, he had several hundred acres of land that he farmed. And I think by the standards of the day, he was pretty well to do. But he was still basically a farmer. I should also mention that families during that period of time were 7, 8, 9 kids. Not like today, but back then that was a pretty common phenomenon. So if you were a farmer, you had to support not only yourself and your wife, but up to 8, 9 or more kids. So it took a lot of resources in order to make that all work. Conrad had 2 wives. His first wife, I believe, was born, or he married in 1746, and she died a couple years later. The records don't indicate what she died from, but her name was Anna Marie Kuhn, and then 2 years later, Conrad married a woman by the name of Agnesa Hack, and Agnesa Hack became our 7th generation ancestor, and Conrad is the 8th generation. His son, who was born in 1750, is our 7th generation ancestor. And Christian was named, the 1750 Christian was named after his grandfather, Christian also, but the Christian of 1680 from Germany. So churches were very important back in the day, and there was a church in Bucks County. I think it's technically Kuntzville by today's standards, that had a church, Muslim Zion Lutheran Church, and Christian was baptized in that church, and in fact the records of 1750 for the church are still available today, and as a matter of fact I've got a copy of his baptismal date with his parents' name, his birth date, and sponsors, and that is all in that record from that church. So it is pretty interesting, more than interesting, to recognize that church records going back 260, 270 years is still available and still valid, and oftentimes the only record we have of people, especially in historical events like births, marriages, deaths, burials, are recorded for us in church documentation. And were it not for that, we wouldn't have any records at all of some of these happenings or some of these people.
How long did they stay in Berks County?
Well, I believe that they stayed a little over 30 years. The 1680 Christian Mansmith, who came over with his family in 1734, died 10, 12 years later. And so, with that in mind, there wasn't a lot of family ties to the Berks County area. So, somewhere around 1774, he moved to Christian. That's the seventh generation Christian, along with his father. They moved in about 1767. Excuse me for reading, but some of these dates, if I don't read them, I'll get them wrong. Then the township that they moved to from Berks County was East Pennsboro Township in Cumberland County, which is near today's Harrisburg and Carlisle area. So it is here where Christian, the seventh generation Christian, married Susanna Baum in about 1774. And from there, Christian moved down to Greensburg, Pennsylvania, which is kind of a suburb of Pittsburgh. So I believe that Anna Marie Kuhn came from that particular area in, I guess that would be southwestern Pennsylvania. So I should make mention that going back to Kutztown and the Mausoleum Lutheran Church, that church is still in existence today. And as a matter of fact, I was able to communicate with the admin person for that church, and she was the one that was able to send me records for Christian, his birth and his baptism in 1750. So Berks County is a big stop for me on my ancestry research activity, but it is certainly not the only stop that I'll be making.
Did the family stay in Greensburg County for a long time?
Well, to some degree, the Mansmiths are kind of like nomads. They moved around quite a bit. I mean, there are some families that are born in a spot, they're raised in a spot, they get married, have kids in a spot, and die in that same spot. And that was not the case for the Mansmiths. They moved around a bit. I believe that they stayed in the Greenburg area of Westmoreland County for maybe 20 years or thereabouts. Some of the exact time periods are not known, keeping in mind that we had just become a country in 1787, and the census really did not take effect until sometime in the early 1800s. So a lot of this information is based on, to some degree, church records. There is some recorded history. I believe that Christian and his father were school teachers for a period of time in the Westmoreland area. But for the most part, they stayed in Westmoreland County, which is inclusive of Greensburg. uh, for about 20 or so years. One of their kids, Johann Peter Mansmith, who is our sixth generation ancestor, was born in 1787 in, I believe, Greensburg, which is part of Washington or Westmoreland County. Johann Peter, who ultimately became a pastor, grew up in that part of the southeastern Pittsburgh area, and at a very early age became a school teacher along with his father in that part of the state. He was a circuit minister that traveled not only the southwestern portion of Pennsylvania, but also the eastern portion of Ohio. His start into the ministry was a little rocky. He had a gift, and people in the community knew that he had a gift for preaching, and he dedicated himself to the Lord at a very, very early age. Circuit ministers were few and far between back in the early 1800s. And so they didn't always have a minister when a baby was born or when somebody died. So they took it upon themselves to call on people who may have a certain gift to officiate in a birth, in a baptism, or in a death. And the community called on Johann Peter Mansmith to do that. And he got in trouble with the Reformed Church hierarchy because he performed things that only an ordained minister was allowed to perform. So he had to go before a board, and he pleaded his case and quite frankly indicated that if the church could not send a circuit minister to perform those duties, somebody had to do it. So they ultimately succumbed and allowed him to study the ministry in earnest and assign a ordained minister to watch over what he was doing. And then about 2 years later, he was officially ordained as a minister in the Reformed Church. I believe that the Reformed Church has subsequently been defined as the Church of Christ, which is a substantial denomination. But he was also very, very close with the Lutheran churches in the community, and as a matter of fact, officiated at many Lutheran activities, whether it was baptisms, weddings, funerals, you name it. So he was a huge contributor toward the religious welfare in southwestern Pennsylvania and the Ohio area. At one point in his ministry, early on, he was a circuit minister for 11 churches. And as I understand it, it was a tremendous load on a single minister to try and minister to 11 congregations. But he did the best he could with what he had. Circuit ministers, they rode on horseback from town to town, and when they got where they were going, they may preach from morning till night, and if there were weddings that needed to be performed, he did that. If there were baptisms, he did that. He led in confirmation classes, you name it, and he did that. But ultimately, a church in eastern Ohio offered him a job to be their minister. The First Reformed Church of Canton, Ohio. That church is still in existence today, and there's a sister church, a Lutheran church, almost next door, that he had almost the same instrumental support in establishing that Lutheran church as the First Reformed. The First Reformed Church is still in existence today, and if you go on their webpage and look at history, you will find the name Reverend Johann or John, whichever, I can't remember, Peter Mansmith as the founding pastor for that church. And like I say, and that's in existence right now today, and they go back the better part of 200 years to identify who was the founding pastor. So it is a great tribute to Reverend Mansmith, our ancestors, and ultimately he wound up spending 40 plus years in the ministry. He ministered until about 3 or 4 months before he died. That was his entire life. A few facts. He was a prolific guy. He had 13 kids, one of which was Anthony, our 5th generation, or my 5th generation ancestor. And he ultimately died in eastern Ohio. There's a lot of story that's been written about him. As a matter of fact, I'll show you this. I don't know whether you can read it or not, but it's called The Mansmiths in America, and it's my ancestry life. I'm the creator of this particular document, and what it does is it kind of provides a quick synopsis of each generation, where they lived, where they died, who they married. Titles here. This one happens to be about Christian Mansmith, the 1680 Christian Mansmith, and then it goes back a couple of generations and it comes up with Johann Peter Mansmith. And I have a whole dissertation on him. He wrote a biography on his life in ministry, and I've taken some excerpts from that, not to be confused with biblical text, that is the word of Jesus, but I have outlined his text in red so that whoever wanted to read it knew that it was his own writing. And in it he talks about the various churches that he was significant in ministering to. And there's a church in Springfield, Salem, Good Hope, Rowlers, St. James, Ackertown, Liberty, and those are the ones that he names in his autobiography. All of these churches are in western Pennsylvania. So I wrote up a bit of a history. I don't know whether I'm going to add to it. There is also some stuff, if someone is interested, the fascinating story of the Mansmiths. I don't know who wrote that, but the final dissertation is here talking about Virgil Moneysmith. So the name Mansmith was divided up into many different names, one of which was Moneysmith, M-O-N-E-Y, Smith. German origins of Mansmith is another document that's on the internet, and here it goes through a whole litany of different names, derivatives of Mannsmith. There's Manusmith, Man-Smith, Man-O-Smith, Man-Smith with two N's, Mansmith with one N, Mansmith with two S's, so on and so forth. Moneysmith is in here also. So it just kind of gives you an idea of all of the variations that transpired from Mahanschmidt to us today. And as such, there are probably a lot of our relatives that are not named Mansmith, but nonetheless tree into our bloodline at some point in our history.
So how did we get from Ohio to Iowa?
The Reverend died in 1757, I believe. He had 13 kids, one of which was Anthony. And Anthony, he was born in 1829. And as best as I can tell, he was in eastern Ohio for about 40 years. And then he and his wife, Amanda, and their two kids, one of which is J.C. Mansmith, one of which is Levi, who is our direct bloodline. They moved to Iowa. Why they moved is a guess. Like so many other moves, what causes nomads to move or migrate? Sometimes you just don't know, and it's not recorded. I think that the Civil War had something to do with it. The Civil War came about in 1861, lasted for a few years, ultimately was settled, but there was a lot of discontent, both north and south, of those states that fought vigorously against each other. And I, to some degree, believe that Anthony wanted to get out of all of that. He just didn't want any part of it. He had heard that Iowa was a great place for farmers. The land was extremely rich. There were a fair number of Germans that had already migrated to Iowa, and so I think he just picked up his family and made the trek. Why they didn't stop in Indiana or Iowa or Illinois, I have no idea. So it's unfortunate, but just don't really have a good handle on why he made the move. Levi, our generational ancestor, he was born, I believe, in 1751. By 1871, he had married Juanita Craven, who was an Iowa resident, and they moved around a bit in central Iowa and ultimately settled in a place where my dad was born and raised in Burt, Iowa, which is north central Iowa. But in the meantime, his father, Anthony, moved to Hartley, and that's where he and his youngest son lived and ultimately died. Anthony, there's an interesting, I don't know if you want to call it a dichotomy here or not, but Anthony had two sons. One was Levi, our direct bloodline, and one was J.C., or John Charles. And somewhere along the line, Levi and his wife, Juanita, moved to Kossuth County, which is in the Burt, Iowa area. J.C., John Charles, and his dad stayed in Hartley. Why they stayed and Levi left, don't know. But I'm going to guess one of two things. Either Levi felt that there was an opportunity in Kossuth County for him to prosper, or J.C. Already had found his niche in the Hartley, Iowa area and decided to stay there, and his dad was already planted in there, so the two of them stayed there. Ultimately, if you go to the grave where both J.C. and his dad Anthony are buried, you will find grave markers that don't even list Anthony's last name. There's a family headstone called Mansmith, and then there's 5 or 6 graves in front of that. Anthony is one, John Charles is another. Don't even list their last name. I don't know whether that was customary at the time or what have you, but Anthony was born a Mansmith, and it appears as though he died a Mansmith. So somewhere during his life, our name changed from Mansmith to Mansmith. So I think that Anthony and Amanda had a big hand in making that change. And then Levi followed suit with changing his name, and as far as I know, he may have been born a Mansmith. I'm not sure of that because there's no records of him being born as far as first name and last name. We know the date, but we don't know anything else. Somewhere during that generation, the name Mansmith was altered, and that is kind of the significance of what occurred during Anthony's lifetime. Levi died in 1891, and at that time he had 6 kids, as I recall, all of them boys. Those 6 kids, one of which was my grandfather, all lived in the Burt, Iowa area. They were born and raised in that part of the Iowa state. Chauncey, I think, was born in 1875, and so he was a teenager when his dad died. Juanita, who was his mother, married again a man by the name of Southard. She essentially had to get married because one of my grandfather's siblings was only a year old. Roy Mansmith was a year old at the time. So Juanita worked hard at finding another suitor. So he continued his growing up years, lived in the Kossuth County area. He was a blacksmith by trade, unlike predecessors that were farmers. He was a very good blacksmith, as I understand it, but he was a very poor business person. So he would do work for people, and they would never pay him, and nothing would ever happen. So he and his wife and my dad and his 6 siblings were pretty poor growing up. As I understand it, Chauncey was a good man, a hard worker, but just never seemed to be able to make ends meet. So they struggled their entire life as far as funds were concerned.
What can you tell us about your grandfather Chauncey?
Well, I don't know a lot, to be perfectly honest, other than what I've read. He died in 1945, and that was 3 years after I was born. So I only saw him a couple of times. Quite frankly, I don't even remember him. My understanding was that he was a very good, upstanding man, not only with his family, but in the community. Unfortunately, that didn't help him when it came to financially supporting his wife and 7 kids. So, but beyond that, I don't know a whole lot. My dad was born in 1914, and most of his siblings were younger or were older than him. And although there was a lot of love, there wasn't a lot of opportunity for work. So much so that my dad had to move away from Burt, Iowa, where he grew up, because he couldn't find work. So he wound up moving to the Chicago area somewhere around 1938.
So was that the final relocation for the Mansmiths?
Yes and no. My dad, when he moved from Burt, Iowa to Chicago, he had an uncle. The uncle that was only a year old when the uncle's dad died, the youngest one. But somehow, some way, he was employed in the Chicago area, working for, I believe it was a company called Pullman, which made railroad cars at the time, and they were very prosperous and they were very big. And I believe that the reason that he had moved was because he moved with his mother, Juanita, when she remarried. This man by the name of Southard was raised in Illinois, and for some reason went to Iowa and then moved back to Illinois. And so I believe that it was that activity that allowed my dad's Uncle Roy to get a job at the Pullman Company. And he was a smart man, and ultimately told my grandfather, why don't you send Mel to Chicago? He can stay with us and I'll get him a job, because my dad couldn't find a job anywhere. So that's how that initial move came. And then my dad stayed in and around Chicago all his life until the 70s. And when my mom and dad retired, they decided that Florida was where they wanted to live. So to answer your question, that wasn't the last move. Chicago is where they raised the family. They got married and they lived until they retired. But after retirement, there was another move in store for them down in Florida.
So when did your mom and dad start their family?
Good question. They were married in 1940. I think my dad moved from Iowa to, I think it was the Harvey area of Chicago around 1938, and wasn't here but a very short time, and met my mom. They went together for 2 years and wound up getting married. So they were married in 1940. I came along in 42. My sister came along in 44, and then your grandfather came along in 1948.
Did your mom grow up in the Chicago area?
Yes, yes. My grandfather, on my mom's side, when he married my grandmother, her maiden name was Fabry, first name was Catherine. When my grandfather married my grandmother, he built a home for my grandmother as a wedding present. It was unheard of, and that was pretty much the home base that my grandparents and their family had throughout their life. My grandfather, when he died, he still owned that house. My grandmother lived a number of years after my grandfather died. When my first wife, Lydia, and I came back from the Navy, we rented an apartment in the same house as my grandparents' home, even though they weren't living there at that time. So there's a lot of history in that home, and as such, there's a lot of closeness of the entire family to that home in the Blue Island community. So even though my parents moved around a bit, I think if you were to ask them today where was their home base at, they would probably say Blue Island, and more than likely say that house on Mozart Street in Blue Island is where the center of their life was.
We're almost at present day now. Is the Mansmith story coming to a close?
Yes, yes and no. From my perspective, it's coming to a close because I've already recorded a lot of my life into Ancestry and the life of my kids. Now, my kids still have a lot of life left, and who knows where their lives are going to take them. From your perspective, this is the point where we branch off and go separate bloodline ways. My dad is your great-grandfather, so that's the tie. Your grandfather was my brother, close but not a cigar, so the tie is with my parents and your great-grandparents. So from here, everything going back in time is the same, but your your job, if you so choose to keep up the ancestry tree for your family, would be to document your grandfather and grandma and your mom and dad, and then you and whatever comes, after that. So it's to the point where all of the next generations need to pick up whatever it is that they chose to pick up or choose to pick up and carry it forward. Some of them will, some of them won't, and maybe at some point down the road there will be somebody doing research similar to what I have done to fill in the gaps. But to answer your basic question, I think we are now at a close for what I have done to this point that matches what our family is all about in their history and in their family tree. So I've got a couple of thank yous that I need to make. First off, I want to thank you, Tyler, for giving me the opportunity to talk about my ancestry, my heritage, my family tree, things that as I age are getting closer and closer to my heart. So I want to thank you for taking the time to do all of this stuff, to put some stuff back there on the blue screen, to do the editing, to make me look smart, whatever. I do appreciate it. I would also like to thank anyone who may decide that they want to view this, that shows an interest in not only our family heritage, but in the work that I have done up until this point of time. And in particular, I'd like to thank those that have an interest in the origin of the Mansmith name and the Mansmith family. And last but not least, I would like to thank a man by the name of Christian Mansmith. The Christian Mansmith that was born in 1680 in Germany. The man who decided to pick up his wife and his kids in the latter years of his life and moved to a strange country, a country that he knew very little about, a country that wasn't a country yet, and endure the hardships of a boat ride across the Atlantic, where as many as 40% of the pilgrims coming over died because of disease and lack of food and in general just poor living conditions. So without him and his initiative, we either wouldn't be here, or as we talked over lunch, we'd all be speaking German. So a special thanks to Christian for his perseverance in wanting something better for his family. So thank you all. I appreciate it. And I hope you've enjoyed what we've put together.